Being in a marketing lead role for a video game company has a surprisingly big responsibility in helping plan and design the games up front. This is Victoria Chin, the marketing manager for a Toronto game studio called Games by Stitch.
We have to justify everything. So for a horror game too, I have to tell you our projections for how many people generally like horror genre, and we pull those numbers, we do the research, because the people who like horror are not the same people who play FPSs necessarily.
In this interview, we talk about what marketing does, what's exciting in VR right now, and what's special about their new game, Broken Spectre, which is really cool, and even how cosplay is becoming an important part of the games industry. Let's go.
This is Behind the Games from newoverlords.com, where we seek creators of all kinds to find out what's behind our favorite games. With your hosts, Jeff and Seema.
From the New Overlord studio, I'm Jeff Elamek.
And from our Northeast studio, I'm Seema.
Today, we are joined by Victoria Chin, a marketing manager. Victoria, hello.
Hey, what's up?
So
Hi, Victoria.
You are a marketing manager. Why don't you give us a little bit of your own introduction, what the job is and where you come from and what your studio is like as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. So again, my name is Victoria and I'm marketing manager at Games by Stitch. We are a fairly young indie company out of Toronto, Canada, and we have about 3 games under our belt that have been published. Right now, we are really into VR. We are currently developing a horror VR game featuring hand tracking controls called Broken Spectre, which we demoed at PAX East recently, and it was very well received by everyone. We're very excited to keep developing that and see how that performs at launch. And our previous VR title, our very first VR title, is called Flow Weaver, which is actually available on the Meta Quest store right now. You can check it out. It is a fantasy-themed escape room game where you play as a trapped wizard of sorts who needs to jump between multiple dimensions, and you gotta solve puzzles on a multi-layered way of thinking in order to escape. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, definitely check that out on the Meta store.
I was really excited when I got to your area, started chatting there at PAX. I think VR is poised to get really big, and there's interesting ways to go about it. And you guys and Games by Stitch has taken the opportunity to figure out a new way to create an interaction model. You know, it's got the hand tracking, you know, especially with the new game, and it's designed a couple games that are well suited to VR, and that's, I think, what's really fun what you've done. I thought, you know, the idea of the escape room games, the idea of the experiential game, where you're very immersed. That's I think where things need to be. As opposed to just ports of existing games. You got to go off in a new direction. So I'm sure that's been exciting for you guys.
Yeah, VR in general is a really exciting market just because it hasn't been fully saturated yet. And exactly as you said, it's like at the early stages, it's kind of like the wild, wild west. There's room for everyone to innovate and make their name in VR because you don't have the huge AAA studios like dominating it just yet. There definitely are amazing games out there that are done by bigger studios for sure. And they're amazing to play. I could think of like Half-Life Alyx. The Resident Evil port was really good. And then there's a Myst got remade for VR, which is really exciting for anyone who like played that in the 90s.
Yeah, that's cool.
But in general, for indies, it's really kind, especially for indies right now. And we really enjoy having that platform to present something that is a new way of thinking of how to design a game or a new way of interactive experiences.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I'm looking forward to more. But let's talk about you and your part of the game industry. So one of the things we like to do here, and this is sort of the point of this podcast, is as people think about the game industry and indie devs and developing a game, they think of a coder, they think of a person standing at the desk writing code,
or maybe an artist,
artist
in a code. Yeah.
There's a lot more that goes into getting games out the door and creating a studio and all of the roles that need to come together. Let's talk about being a marketing manager and what a sort of a day in the life is. You know, what are your key responsibilities? What are the kinds of things you do? And then we'll get into like the tools and tricks of the trade.
Yes, of course. So as marketing, most people probably think that our job is to sell the game, which it is, but we're actually involved from the very beginning of ideation down to execution. So we assist with market research, especially when we're coming up with a concept with the next game and we're doing pitching. We will do research on target demographics, like what is there a need for a type of game that hasn't been served yet in the current market, and then we kind of like compile all those ideas, present them, and it helps the team make a decision on what to design. We design about one game a year, so it's a very long process of coming to that decision on what to make. The ideas are endless.
Sure.
So for marketing, we are there to kind of help give a voice for the consumer just from the very, very get-go. And it's a symbiotic relationship between us and the developers and the artists, because sometimes we'll say, oh, that feature that you want to do, it may not be the most like intuitive for like first time VR players, if that is what our target demographic is. So sometimes it's important to have that voice on the team, because developers, like, bless them, but they can really get really into the nitty gritty of their game design, and they're so into their own project that an outside perspective can really help refresh them in terms of thinking of a new way of looking at something, or not shutting out certain demographics or types of players,
Right.
just based off of some decisions we made. And it's not my job to tell them how to design the game,
Right.
but I do bring up these things in meetings and just be like, hey, just like FYI, if this is important to you, we should add we should improve the sound cues or improve the visibility of the font,
Right.
because things like that, like accessibility, readability, are things that I will hear about when the game is launched, and people are like, I couldn't read the text. And guess who has to answer all the social media comments? I do. So it's been really beneficial for our team to have a marketing presence that's, for the most part, I just sit in on meetings, so I'm aware of what happens.
Right.
And on a community management side, it also means I can absolutely go to PAX and talk to someone like you, Jeff, fully about the game development very comfortably, because I was there since the beginning.
Right.
And I know the process for all the decisions they made. I know what considerations we made strategically and any obstacles that we had when it came to like building. And from just a social media standpoint, that's another large component of my job. I'm actually the only marketing personnel at Games by Stitch currently, so I do everything from big picture planning to just the day to day.
Yeah, at a big studio, there'll be lots of people in the marketing group.
You might have someone dedicated for each game too,
Right.
but I handle all of it.
Oh, I didn't think of that. Multiple games at the same time.
Right. And like the developers and artists, they're busy. They're busy coding, they're busy drawing and modeling. They don't have time to update on socials, but that's still a very important part of a studio's presence on social media, is to frequently have content, frequently keep people in the loop on what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that's my voice.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
No, that's excellent. And one of the things you sort of breezed over there, but I think is really important for people to understand, marketing, your assessment of the market and voice of the customer, bringing that to the design process is key. And the data, you said market research, and researching what the market space is for a new game. The research and data parts of your job, I think are really important for people not to underestimate. It's not just, hey, I just read all of the tweets coming at us, and I hand them off to the developers. Doing that kind of data and analytics across big data sets of where is the market at, where is what are people demanding, where is the customer satisfaction at, where's the customer sentiment at. I know you've talked about sentiment analysis. That's interesting. So if someone out there has a data background, there's a demand and a home that you can have in marketing with that data background. That's really, really important, I think.
Yeah, this is really helping me
Absolutely.
understand the overlap between marketing and community management, because at first,
Yeah.
to me, they seemed like two separate things, but I totally get it now. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and the reason why our community management is all done in-house by myself is because I can have those comfortable conversations and be able to quickly respond to someone with the voice of the studio, as opposed to us outsourcing community management to like an agency or something. They can only do something surface level, or they only post the copy that you supply
Right.
them. So it's a much more like formal and almost like, I want to say, distanced approach. But community management, we're building a community around our studio as us as people. We're human beings making a game. Or not just some company you can like complain and abuse verbally.
Right.
Although I imagine that happens.
Sometimes.
I would hope it happens less for a smaller studio. That we've been had we have friends at a couple of big studios. We've been talking to BioWare on and off for a long time, and I got to know really well a couple of their community managers and parts of their marketing team. And boy, sometimes you got to have thick skin. I think so. Hopefully, you don't have to deal with as much as some of those big studios need to deal with. As soon as that market gets really huge, the most vocal, the smallest percentage of users starts to get bigger and bigger, and that vocal negative sentiment tends to surface from time to time. But I think, as you said, establishing that relationship and having that constant communication, that heads off a lot of that. And it
It
because it,
does.
it
Yeah.
provides that opportunity for people to feel like they've been listened to. And so do you see that sort of like the key there and why you like being so close to it?
Absolutely. As part of an indie studio, we want to lessen the distance between us and the people who play our games. So I think having that constant contact, that
Yeah.
level of transparency is very important because it's genuine and you're building genuine relationships. So it's almost like critiquing a friend
Yeah.
versus critiquing a giant faceless corporation.
Right.
Like it's
Right.
absolutely true. The bigger you get, the more people feel like it's okay because you don't feel
Right.
it. But there are still human beings behind this game, and we've had bad reviews as well. And I think it's really important for us to always never lose focus on the big
Yeah.
picture and to not focus necessarily on the negative reviews, because that could send you into like a depression spiral and be like, oh wow, they really hated it. But as you said, Jeff, it's really honestly a vocal minority. When people are unhappy, that's when they say something.
Yeah.
But I find as human beings, when we're happy and satisfied, we actually just go on with our day.
Right.
Right.
And yeah, and the numbers don't lie. We look at our sales numbers to keep ourselves in check and be like, well, we're still doing well sales wise, even though we've had like 3 more people really angry this week. But
I mean,
But
that's another
if the
great
sales keep
point
going up,
for
yeah.
data, since you have other
Right.
data points to look at.
Yeah.
that it does add to the data set, and can be useful in figuring out what to tweak, what to evolve, what to do in the next design. So it's not that you would ever necessarily want or need that to even stop. So I definitely get
Yeah.
that. Um,
We do value the feedback loop, though. We do separate when there's a constructive criticism versus just a very subjective criticism. So someone said, wow, this game is really ugly. And I'm just like, well, I guess the art style just wasn't for you. Are we going to change the game because you hate the art style when there's a lot of other people who are like, oh, it's
Right.
awesome?
Right.
Probably not. But if someone said, oh, I just really didn't like that I was locked out of a certain mechanic until I could achieve X. I found that too convoluted. And if there's a pattern of that
Yeah, the
feedback,
patterns.
then we do take that into account and we say, okay, let me think maybe this is an issue overall.
Yeah, that's excellent. Looking for those patterns, gathering the signals and looking for the patterns. Also the idea, just the shout out there to all of us as gamers, the constructive explaining your experience. I find has some of the best reception when I've talked to community managers or studios or game developers. Here's what my experience was, and this is why it was not as optimal for me as a data point. Not, your game is bad or this is bad, because it is my experience, and that can be a useful data point. Explaining why is, I think, where the value is going to come out of. Um, One of the things I also wanted to touch on and just get a little bit of your perspective on, because I think it's really unique how some of it works in Canada. So Games by Stitch is a Canadian studio, and I know that the way the Canadian government incents the cool things that you and other related businesses are doing is slightly different. than it works in some other places like the US. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, sure. I guess being in Canada, we're very lucky. We have a lot of good support programs from the government to fund arts and culture development. And a lot of our games are funded by the wonderful Canada Media Fund and Ontario Creates. And they specifically support Canadian businesses and to create Canadian jobs in the arts and culture sector. So how that works is we generally write a pitch, which is what I mentioned before. When we're pitching an ideation, we have to come up with a compelling case for why we want our game to be funded, because we are coming up against other game studios and other arts and cultural interactive media projects. It's not like a gaming grant. And so we have to make a case for why we think this will be a boon for the Canadian arts and culture scene, why it's innovative. There's always an innovation aspect. So you can't just go ask for funding for any old game that you want to make. It has to be, as I said, innovative.
Yeah.
And that's why we did hand tracking, because we wanted to bring something new. And it really looks good for Canada for like, oh, look, we produced this game that features this new interactive model.
Right.
Wow. So they're looking for things to make themselves look good. So once you understand that, you write the pitch surrounding that to position yourselves in a way where it's attractive for them to provide funding so they get the credit for these projects. But really, it changes our development because it also means we have to do a lot of reporting and we have to be able to develop within the time frame that the grants fund for.
Okay.
So that is why I explained that we do a game a year. And other game studios listening that might be like, you only develop for a year and you make these games in 1 year? What? That's pretty
I was
fast.
thinking that actually.
Yeah, so we do have to take that into consideration. Unless we are able to secure additional funding that is not tied to like, oh, you have to release this game and then report on the results by a certain deadline. That would change the scenario, but in case all we have is government funding that we can count on, we think in terms of how long of a game can we make within a year, and like the scope, how much personnel can we support to build that thing. At a certain point, you can only hire so many people to make a game.
Right.
Like you can hire 30 people, but still the game might still take 6 months to make. So it's like everyone's just getting in their own way.
More
but that's
cooks
just
doesn't
a little
make
difference.
the turkey get done faster.
That is exactly. That's a very good point. Yeah. So that's a little difference on how some Canadian studios who are funded by government grants might run, as opposed to a studio that has full autonomy. Like you're using your own money, your own investments. You're taking a bank loan out or something to fund your development. And in that case, you could control pretty much how long you want to develop for.
Do you ever have to argue that games can be considered art and culture? Do you ever come up against people who would say, no, that's not art or culture?
I don't think we've had that obstacle with the funds that we have been applying for. So I can't really speak to that.
Yeah, no,
that's awesome.
It's definitely a broader conversation. I think it's definitely evolved in the last 5-10 years to be realized that gaming can be very artistic and can advance arts and culture. You go back 10, 15, 20 years ago, and no one would have argued or tried to argue, or a lot of people would have argued against the idea that games were art, but they certainly are. So
we think they are, for sure.
Yeah, we think they are.
Absolutely.
There's probably still debate. You'll get purists out there that there's purists out there that don't think Marvel movies are cinema. So who was it? Scorsese said that, or somebody. But I really love that idea that Canada is making that kind of investment and including games as part of arts and culture. I think that really speaks well of sort of that Canadian approach and what arts and culture means. And I would love to see more countries make that kind of investment too. I think that's really fun and important. It does put some interesting constraints around you, as you said. But sometimes when you constrain a project, you can get a lot of innovation and creativity in what comes out of it. When you have a project that's has unlimited boundaries, that it can sometimes grow outside of what's useful as a product and wallow in the development cycle that just goes on forever. And you end up with something like Star Citizen. So I
Yeah, for us, we really enjoy the challenge, honestly. And as exactly as you said, knowing that it's a 1 year build, helps us to focus.
yeah,
Like we make decisions a little faster. We don't spend like 2 months being like, let's put a pin in it and come back
right.
later. Like we don't have 2 months to pin it. Let's discuss it now. If something is really an issue, we'll address it. But at least decision making wise, we're pretty fast and efficient.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I was really fascinated about what you said about marketing research, and then if it put together with the way you get your funding, and what you said about hand tracking being, sort of the leading tech edge of gaming. Does that affect what you consider your target demographic in any way?
Yes. So we wanted to get into VR just because it's also such a new technology and hasn't been like, I guess, super saturated, as I
Right.
said before. So really on these funding applications, they're like, oh, wow, you're entering into VR. That's like new territory. That's so exciting. So that's why we are doing a lot of VR right now. And when it comes to the market research, we do actually still have to make a case that there is a big enough market for a
Mm-hmm.
project. So if we went super niche and gave a pitch that's like we want something that appeals to probably 10 people in the whole
Yeah.
world, it'll be like, we don't know if that's a really good return on investment in the end. So that's where market research comes in. The thing we had to argue for was not necessarily is a game worthy enough to be accepted for funding. But when we wanted to pitch a VR game, our very first VR game, Flow Weaver, that was several years ago when we did the initial
Sure.
pitch. And that was when VR was still very new. I think it was the Quest 1
Right.
was like about to release. It was still like the time of the early Rift
Yep.
S, and VR was just pretty inaccessible as a whole to the consumer market. So we actually had to pull up numbers on the trajectory of what we thought the VR market as a whole would do. And that is something that you don't necessarily have to argue for in other platforms. Like, I don't need to tell you people have computers
Right.
and
Right.
phones. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you don't need to argue that point. But for VR, the government's like,
Blizzard
well,
has to argue
are the
if
people
whether or
going to
not
play your
people have
game?
phones,
Because it's,
but
yeah, it's a technology gate, the
yeah,
VR aspect of it. So to answer your question, Seema, all of that kind of does play into the application and our constraints for target demographics. Whenever we have to justify everything. So for a horror game too, I have to tell you our projections for how many people generally like horror genre, and we pull those numbers, we do the research, because the people who like horror are not the same people who play FPSs
Right.
necessarily. There can be overlap, but they do want to see the concrete numbers that we've done research that there's enough demand for horror games. There's enough demand for a narrative game. And what we do is we find we like audiences. So we find games that are similar to what that might inspire what we want to make. And for us, we used Gone Home, Vanishing of Ethan Carter, as some of our talking points when we're pitching and saying like these games were very, very successful, even though they are more niche. They're like walking simulators, very atmospheric, no jump scares, that type of horror. And so we use existing case studies as a way to say, well, this is why we think we can find success in this space as well.
that's
Awesome.
yeah, that's fascinating, and I think it really speaks to something that anyone looking to develop games can probably get value out of. I would imagine the big studios would be doing this. They're going to need to be looking at their markets and ensuring that their investment is going to have a return. And there's a whole business model that they'll research that they'll do to make that happen. But I think that this is an interesting learning point for all the way down to the one person who decides that they want to make a game. I think you do need to think about these kind of things, and you're in a unique position that you have stakeholders that are asking you for this up front. But even you as doing an indie developer, single person, or a couple people getting together to do a passion project, to ask yourself these questions and do a little research on where is the technology at, where is the platform at, what kind of market is there really? Is this going to die if I make a game for some weird thing like the Magic Leap and it goes out of business? Well, then I have no way even to distribute my game. So understanding that, understanding the market, understanding the competitors. You don't want to make a game that somebody's already made. So I think there's a lot of room for all kinds of games, even similar games across the market. But this, I think this is a great point to go out there and understand the market, to do some of this kind of marketing job. And you're a marketing manager at a 20-person firm. I've talked to a couple 2-person firms. They're going to need to put this hat on. They're going to need to be their own marketing manager, and I think they could learn from somebody like you and some of this kind of discussion. To say,
Yeah, if anyone wants to ask or DM me, I'm always open.
well,
to
we'll
There you
make sure
go.
we get your
Yeah.
contact information at the end of this as well.
I've helped a few.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing, and that's one of my dreams for Seema and I doing this as well, to connect the creators, and I would love to see that kind of collaboration going on more and more too.
Yeah. Well, if anyone is actually, while we're on the point on like networking, if anyone out there listening who is a VR developer, Spatial Ape is a really great community, and they run very regular meetups, and they have this cool program. It's almost like, it's like speed dating, but like business speed dating, where they will randomly match up people from industry with each other like once a month or something to like chat or exchange information. And so some people will be like, oh, I want to talk to someone who's in marketing. And for me, I'm like, I'll talk to anyone.
Oh, that's great.
So it's a neat way to like make some new friends, and also just pick someone else's brain who is in a similar industry, but maybe going through a different type
Wow,
of
that's a pro
process.
tip right there.
That's amazing. That's excellent.
But taking it back to your role as a marketer for a second, I was poking around the Broken Spectre site, and I came across the narrative, The Black Saw, and I read the first few panels of that, which is it's like a pre-story to the game Broken Spectre, and I read the first few panels of that, and I was just like so sucked into the whole story and the whole world. So my question for you is, were you a part of that decision to do that creative effort to write that pre-story? Because it really worked on me.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that, because yes. So internally, what part of my job is to pitch ways to market creatively. And I think part of the government grants is that they force you to think very creatively, because they don't like it when you're doing something that's just kind of very standard and boring, because they want innovation. So I was like, all right, let's go off the deep end. And I said, what if we made a webtoon? And I called it a webtoon because webtoon is just so hot. It was trending. It's by a Korean company called Naver, and it's now like the largest webcomic platform out there in English, and then also in Asia. It's really, really big. And they also bought Wattpad.
Okay.
So that's how big they've grown. They've, it's another platform to keep an eye on if you're in the creative industry. So I said, well, this is very early on in the game, and we didn't actually have a game built, but I still had to create marketing assets. And I'm like, well, what if we made a prequel story? Since we had the general story of Broken Spectre locked down at that point, we knew what the story was going to be about. But we needed to be able to release a marketing asset that would tease the cosmic horror atmosphere and introduce the mountain and some of that backstory without spoiling the game itself. So that was a very interesting challenge, just because when you're doing a narrative story-based game, it's like, well, you can't talk about this person. Then if whoever reads the comic and then they play the game, they'll be like, oh, I bet that's so-and-so. And I'm like, yeah, maybe. But they'll start having like conspiracy theories. I'm like, well, it works for a lot of other communities for people to have conversation, be like people who read the books before they watch like Game of Thrones, or they read Lord of the Rings or watch Lord of the Rings. And then you have show only watchers and you have book people kind of melding together, having these conversations. It's not a bad thing. But The Black Saw is actually a completely different story. And it does have some tie-in to Broken Spectre later on.
Here we go.
I don't want to say what.
Spoilers.
But I mean, it becomes apparent when you play the game.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah, so I'm really glad that you enjoyed that. And we reached out to Canadian author Ian Rogers, who is of dark fiction horror, who's quite accomplished. And he's actually got a Netflix deal coming up for Every House is Haunted.
Oh, it's amazing.
Produced by Sam Raimi. So these are things that we kind of factored into the marketing as well, that we wanted to bring people on board that would validate the
Right.
horror
Right.
too. With Broken Spectre, we one of the producers of the Blair Witch Project is one of our executive producers. So we know with the research we've done in the horror community that pedigree can go a long way. Just mentioning a name that someone is involved in your project for like a horror fan, they're like, oh, now I have to watch it because I love everything that person has done. Or yeah, so there's that approach to that market that we've discovered. And with the Black Saw, it was no different. We had Ian Rogers do the writing, and his writing is just so, it's hard for me to describe, but he hits like that creepiness point that builds up over time. Like if there's no jump scares or anything, but he really hits that like atmospheric voice of cosmic horror that we wanted.
So you sort of described it, two reasons to be bringing in these people that are established in a genre or in a discipline, or one, as you said, you described it as a marketing. There's a marketing effect. If we bring in someone who has an audience of their own and they collaborate with us, then there's marketing value. But in the same way, there's a lot of creative collaborative value. So I would challenge everyone to think about that. How do we all want the marketing boost, but that creative collaborative value, that input, it's really exciting to hear you guys sort of reaching out, and where can we get that horror experience and bring someone in that could consult on that and create the atmosphere. And anyone who's out there developing anything creatively, if you get that kind of collaboration going, I think you can magnify the kind of the what you're creating and put a lot of get a lot more value out of it.
So even though you're in the cycle right now, the Broken Spectre cycle of 1 year, you must already have started the cycle, at least be thinking about what you're going to do next. I'm not asking you that, but what challenges do you see in the future? Like, what's the next technology edge that you could go back to?
Yeah, what's sort of what's on that marketing research wall to say, hey, here's things we should be watching for or keeping an eye on, or staying away from because of our marketing research.
Yes. You asked, forbidden topics. I mean, I don't know if it's NDA or not, but we are already thinking about, the team is still working on Broken Spectre, but there is a smaller team that I guess the top level people who do the ideation. We are now thinking about the next project because you need sufficient time to write, research, prepare, and because those applications are due in September, actually. So you need the time now. You got to get started now, so you're not rushing for that deadline and working like the night before to submit it for the deadline. So we are thinking about the next thing. Sometimes innovation isn't always a technology innovation. It could be innovation in ways of thinking about how to create a game that hasn't necessarily existed yet, or improving on something that has proven to be really great, but you're innovating on top of that concept to make it even better. And a really good example I'm going to put out there is Among Us. We all have heard of Among Us. It took off really well because of the pandemic and big streamers streaming it. But at its very core, the idea of the Among Us game is not new. It's Mafia. It's werewolf. You're trying to find the imposter in your group, or the fake person in your group. Like, that idea is not necessarily new, but they innovated it by putting it in space and having it be like multiplayer online and playable on a phone, cross compatible with phone and Steam, and so that's innovation right there.
Make it really accessible, and that so that you could have a lot. You could have every single one of your friends get into it. Very, very quickly and easily. It's sort of at a click of a button. That's a really important point. So my career for the last few decades has been based around innovation, and a lot of people, when they hear innovation, they think invention, and that's not really what innovation is. Innovation uses invention, and there's a component of that, but it's taking existing things and putting them together in new ways and iterating on them to create more value out of some things that maybe already exist. So I love that idea, as you just talked about too, about innovating from a process or a genre or a concept perspective, and not just from a technology perspective. I always lived in technology
Exactly.
innovation, and I love that. So I love the hand tracking and so you're gonna have to put smell-o-vision on the next horror.
I mean, all of it still has to be present in the
Right,
hardware. So, I mean, we can't take credit necessarily for inventing
right,
hand tracking.
right,
It was already an experimental feature
right,
on the Quests, but we took that technology, we developed for it, and we actually created the idea of designing the controls is what we did, and implementing a way where it was still intuitive for the player. That is something that we can all that we would take credit for. But yeah, we
right,
didn't invent hand
right.
tracking.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. But we just made a very good version of
And
it.
those
which is
those
awesome.
capabilities of the platform, and you as a creator trying to figure out what to do with them, is where the innovation happens. And I think that's really interesting. Let's see what else does the Quest platform have they been adding? They have room tracking now, where they can tell that you have a desk in your room. So maybe you can add that one next in, where you got to like
Oh yeah.
crawl under your own desk or crawl behind your furniture to to escape
To escape.
the monster.
Yeah. A real life
Yeah, there we
obstacle
go.
course. Yeah.
There we go.
Battle arena. Have you tried those before? They're
Uh,
interesting.
yeah. So I've right over my shoulder here. I've got my Quest 2. I've been trying to experiment with just about everything that's out there, and yes, they can get quite interesting.
Yeah, I think the next innovation I feel like would also be in terms of the processing
Yes.
power of headsets, as we've seen from the Quest 1 to the Quest 2. The Quest 2's graphics are much more improved because it's
Right.
just more powerful machine. It's like with any piece of technology, our phones, computers, they just keep getting better every iteration. Um, I would say like the graphics for the Quest are like reminiscent of the
Yeah.
PlayStation 1, PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2. So people who are coming from PC games or like the current gen consoles are like, why do these graphics
Right.
suck?
Right.
Like, well, because it can't. It's a tiny little like computer inside. It's not powerful
Right. And you're
enough.
designing to that platform. You're designing to
Yeah,
basically to a mobile phone platform
yeah,
when you're putting a game native to the Quest 2. I know, and I tend to run mine off of my 3080 card sitting here in the big rig as well, and you can do that kind of remote connection. But you can't design a game that way that then is a Quest 2 platform game. Those platforms will evolve,
exactly.
and being at the forefront of that and being there as they evolve and as those new capabilities come online, I think is going to be really exciting.
Exactly. So visually, innovation can also come from finding ways to optimize your graphics where they're still running at a good frame rate on the native platform that you're developing it for, but wowing people with what
Right.
you're able to
I
achieve.
think that's really important. And again, innovation coming from constraining yourself can be really impressive and interesting. Set those constraints, set that time constraint, set that platform constraint, the memory constraints, and then see what you can do. And the best of the best in the industry can do really interesting things. Even back in the day, the PlayStation 1, the MMOs that are out there today, we're still running on 10-year-old, 15-year-old game engines, but still put out new releases that are visually compelling and doing new and interesting things. And because they're taking the constraints that they have and using that to then innovate within that framework, I think is pretty interesting. So that's gaming industry, and I love that discussion. In fact, we should have you back on just to talk about AR and VR for an hour. Augmented reality
Sure.
is another whole area that I'd love to get into with you. But I wanted to talk about again on the marketing manager. Um, what inspires you? What do you do to stay on top of what new games are out there? What games do you like to play? How does that work for you personally?
Oh, well, I live on the internet, so I innately absorb this
It-
information by osmosis. And I think that's an important part of the job if you really need to be abreast of all of the trends is to just be present. So I'm on Twitter, I'm on YouTube. I watch major like YouTube news channels, key people who do like VR news, for example. They'll always summarize latest news and like the latest headsets
Right.
or the latest games coming out. I look at the Twitter trends. And all of this is from the company account, by the way, because all the accounts I follow signal to the algorithm of the social media platforms that this is the
Right.
topic that I'm interested in. So naturally on my feed, I just see everything like VR or gaming related. I'm not really seeing like puppies and
Right.
music. That's like on my personal profiles. So I would suggest someone to use your company account to follow a lot, interact actually a lot with the post too, because with the social media algorithm, when you interact, even if you like a post from like Meta or Vive or Steam, it signals that this is important content that you're interested in, and they just want you to stay on their platform. So they'll serve you more things that you want to see, so you read more of it. But if anything is large enough, it does reach my eyes eventually. Right. It's not something I have to really deep dive for. And Reddit is another really big one for me. I'm in a lot of the VR Reddits. I just lurk and I look at what people post and like what are they prioritizing discussions around? What are people's sentiment? What are people looking forward to?
Yeah.
And sometimes it might be interesting, to see a one-off comment of someone saying, gee, I wish it'd be nice if someone developed a game for like left-handed people or whatever.
Right.
You never know.
And that is an extremely salient point to potentially use, and we all personally could potentially do this as well, to create a new online persona, kind of, if you're wanting to do research in a particular area and then curate the algorithms, sort of give the signals to the algorithms to get your feeds in the shape of what you want to be able to get the right kind of information on a daily basis. I ended up doing this by accident. Now I realize sort of what you're saying, and it's making sense to me. On one side, I was trying to just go out there and get a bunch of links and RSS feeds and manually make my own set of feeds. But I have, we've got new overlords. I can log in as new overlords into YouTube and do research and watch videos and watch emerging tech and new game releases and reviews, versus me as Jeff. And lately, that's been a lot of, how do I make this Sony A7 IV camera work? So I've got a lot of that on my feed.
So not puppies? Oh, Jeff.
Yeah, but puppies are fun. I like puppies, so maybe that too. The goat videos get me every time. So I watch those, the baby goats.
Love it.
But yeah, so using an identity, a second identity like that, I think that's really creative. I love that idea to use your work one or create a second identity, log in with that to all of the platforms, and then allow that algorithm to do its work and make use of it. Yeah, let it work for you. That's brilliant. I love that. I'm going to do that more. In fact, I'm going to recurate my new overlords algorithm spread, I think. That's an excellent idea. How about for you in the future? So I know you do some things on the side that are really creative. What kind of moonshot ideas out there do you have for you in the future? Do you want to talk about kind of the fun stuff you do on the side? Yeah, why don't we talk about that?
Well, we talked about how my mic and my camera is so great. I stream as well. I'm a Twitch streamer, so I also cosplay. And so I've been in and around like the adjacent gaming industry for many, many years before I came into my position here at Games by Stitch and like actually working in games. So for me, I am a Final Fantasy 14 streamer.
Yeah.
I'm currently wearing Final Fantasy 7 on my shirt. So the next thing for me is to finish Endwalker on stream, and then I'm going to be moving on to 15, and then hopefully 16 whenever that drops. My goal is to play every numbered Final Fantasy on Twitch, and then after that, I guess I'll try Kingdom Hearts.
There you go.
Oh, yes.
That'll probably take the rest of my lifetime.
No, you glossed over it as you being a cosplayer, but you're not just a cosplayer. You're a cosplay artist and professional. So I think that's pretty fascinating too. So that you've won awards for some of your designs, and that probably feeds into the creative side of what you do as a marketing manager as well, I imagine, right?
Absolutely. It takes a creative person to be in marketing sometimes. I'm a professional cosplayer before the pandemic hit, and then after the pandemic hit, I couldn't book any gigs because conventions weren't running, like there's no events to book me. And I used to do costumes for companies, and they would hire me to either appear, like make the costume, wear it based off of like their video game character and wear it at an event to promote, or I would just make a prop and send it off for them to just own. So that's what I used to do. Then when the pandemic hit, I found that my options were drying up in terms of additional revenue streams. So I went back to school and took a course in digital marketing just to brush up on my skills and to have a piece of paper that said, I know social
Right.
media and the internet. It's like, because like, how do you defend
Right.
that in a job interview
Right.
when you're like, trust me,
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
the internet, okay?
Yeah.
And like, okay,
So-
but like,
so do we
what
all.
about your
Yeah.
schooling? Like, listen, they didn't have the internet in my course curriculum when I went to marketing school.
I have
That was a
TikTok
while
on my
ago.
phone. See,
So I
these
did
are
a
my
brush-up
credentials.
course.
Yeah. That doesn't work.
Yeah. I mean, working in gaming industry is really great too, because it's, I would say, like a non-traditional industry. It's not like working in a bank or law office. I can really openly in an interview say, well, I have a following of X and X amount for my cosplay. And they're not going to judge me negatively based on that. And if anything, they're like, "Oh, that's really cool.
Right.
That's so
Right.
creative." So working in a creative industry just gels really well with my skill sets, and I don't have to hide what I do at night.
Yes.
Which is great.
Yeah. I don't have to pretend I'm a different name at all. Yeah.
Exactly. So in terms of what's next, either for you or for gaming in general, what what's a to sort of finish us off, what's a future thing that either you want to do or you want to see Games by Stitch do or you want to see the gaming industry do?
Oh, that is a tough question because I could answer it very
Do it.
selfishly. I think personally for myself, I would like to grow as a streamer, absolutely, because I think building my own platform only enhances and helps my day job as well in terms of my connections and network. So I would like to move into a place where I can get partnered on Twitch or have more brand deals with games, or if other gaming companies want to sponsor my stream or send me a game key. Like, I don't know if you guys know
I
BioWare, if they
know.
want to sponsor my
If
Mass Effect or
BioWare were
something
smart,
playthrough,
they
we
would
could
get
do
right
that.
on that for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yep. So that would be awesome. And I think in general, so speaking as a cosplayer and a streamer, I would like to see more gaming studios or game companies take that side of marketing seriously, the influencer side. So we all know that the huge influencers have big followings, and you're like, I want to get in front of that
Right.
million person audience, of course. But there's a lot of value in smaller streamers, smaller influencers, like micro influencers, because when we interact with our audiences, it's very almost like a one-on-one experience. It's very intimate, it's very cozy, and at sometimes we may even have better engagement because it's not just a
Right.
chat scroll of
Right.
like
Right.
emojis that are running like miles per minute, and like people who are watching my streams are visibly interested in what I'm doing. They're watching the Final
engaged.
Fantasy 14 with me. They're making comments. They're like, oh, now I want to buy this game. Like, oh, should I buy the expansion now after watching you play it? Exactly. They're a lot more engaged because they're here to hang out with me as a person and also interact with me like as a friend. Like when you hang
Right.
with your friend playing games, that's the experience we simulate as streamers. And then on the cosplay side, we've come a long way when it comes to connecting cosplay with game industry, and a lot of companies, especially like Riot. I know BioWare has hired cosplayers, and all the bigger companies hire cosplayers now, but it can really enhance your presence at events and really open that conversation point
Right.
for people to
Yeah,
come to
and
your
we saw
booth.
some of that at PAX. I think that is
Mhm.
an interesting angle because it's become such a part of the con culture and the gaming culture in general. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So there's some great advice from a marketing manager for everybody out there.
Right? And if you still want some validation from a social media perspective, content is king, and how many mentions you have helps your branding. So you want to create experiences that are innately visual and
Right.
photogenic, because then people will post it. So having a cosplayer or like even just a really key piece, like I don't know, standee or statue at your booth, gives someone a reason to take a picture or selfie at your booth and say, well, look at this. This is so cool. And then like hashtag
Yeah.
Broken Spectre. So you increase the reach there, and that's something that like larger companies they already enjoy their organic reach because they've reached that point where people already follow and look at their news. But for smaller companies looking to get out there, that is something that we have consciously thought of and strategized in order to get our hashtag out there, our handle out there. Because the more people who are talking about you, the more
Right.
brand awareness you have.
Well, this has been amazing.
Yeah, it's been
And
fascinating.
I think you've imparted a lot of insight both into the role and into, I think, what anyone either even just as gamers can think about when we engage with marketing or understand how it's going on, and then anyone developing a game that they should be thinking about. As you said, if people wanted to reach out to you and connect or ask more questions, where should they do that?
So my handle is Vicky Bunny Angel, all one word. So it's VICKY Bunny Angel. And I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook. So you can send me a DM there, or email me. I do have a business email. If you want to reach out to me as the marketing manager at Games by Stitch, you can reach me as Victoria at gamesbystitch.com. If you want to talk about possible future collaborations, or you want to link up with us for whatever reason, that's the information
Excellent.
there.
Well, again, thanks. This has been amazing, and hope we can have you on again when next year's project starts to come to fruition and we see what Games by Stitch is doing next. I'm excited.
I can't wait. I can't talk about it right now,
Nice.
but I can't wait.
Little teaser at the end there.
Like, we already know what
Yes.
we're doing. Like, but I can't
Love
say.
it. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a New Overlords production. For more, please visit newoverlords.com for video, subscribe and feed links, and other ways to help the show.